My name is Barbara Thomas, and I want to thank you, Chairman Gottfried, and Assemblymember Paulin for holding this hearing today, and the rest of the members of the committee, because every day that passes without legislation that permits medical aid in dying is a day that is filled with unnecessary anguish, pain, and suffering for people with fatal illnesses and for their families. I am the Aid in Dying Issues Specialist for the League of Women Voters of New York State. I want to thank the legislature for this opportunity to provide recommendations on Assembly Bill A2383A, Paulin, an act to amend the public health law in relation to terminally ill patients' requests for and use of medication for medical aid in dying. The League is a nonpartisan political organization working to promote civic responsibility through informed and active participation of citizens in government. We have 49 local leagues throughout the state, registering and educating voters on local and state issues. The League does not support or oppose political candidates. This year, the League reached consensus on a position created by the League of Women Voters of Utah to support medical aid in dying. This process began in the summer of 2017, when our members voted at our state convention to review medical aid in dying and determine whether or not we supported the policy. Our local leagues began to review an extensive package of materials on both sides of the issue. They hosted more than 24 public forums on the topic and brought in experts both in favor of and opposed to the reform. The leagues hosted civil debates and encouraged attendees to voice their opinions and concerns. A total of 30 leagues participated in the consensus. 24 voted in favor of supporting a position in favor of aid in dying, and 6 opposed. Based on these results, the League of Women Voters of New York State adopted the following position. The League of Women Voters of New York State believes state laws should grant the option for a terminally ill patient to request medical assistance from a relevant licensed physician to end one's life. The League of Women Voters believes such legislation should include safeguards against abuse of the dying and protections for medical personnel who act in good faith compliance with the law. Based on our newly adopted position, the League supports A2383A. We feel this bill adequately addresses the concerns around consent and accessibility. The League feels this bill has sufficient safeguards in place to ensure protection of vulnerable populations and medical personnel who may be morally opposed to aid in dying. This reform will give terminally ill patients access to safe, comprehensive end-of-life options. I chose to become the League's Aid in Dying Issues Specialist because I feel very strongly about the need for the state to permit terminally ill patients to end their lives with medical assistance. I came to these strong beliefs because of my own life experiences. My late husband, Bob, and I both had a parent who laid in a hospital or nursing home bed, unable to move, for over a year as they waited to die. And we also knew a woman who was sent to prison for shooting her husband in order to put him out of his misery. So in about 2001, we both had our lawyer put a clause in our health care proxies and living wills that read, if physician-assisted death and dying should become legal in New York State, I direct my agents to choose this option if, in either agent's opinion, I would have done so if I had been competent. Unfortunately, Bob was stricken with glioblastoma multiforme towards the end of 2010, when it was still illegal for physicians to provide medical assistance to hasten death in the terminally ill. And the law still hasn't been changed. My husband, Bob, died of his brain cancer in January of 2012. We'd been together for 55 years. He was my best friend, my lover, the person I spent more time with than anyone else in my life. We raised 4 sons together, spending lots of time outdoors camping, canoeing, hiking, cross-country skiing. He loved reading, hunting, fishing, and walking in the woods. The first we knew that he had a problem was about a week before Thanksgiving in 2010. It was already dark, and he hadn't returned from walking in the woods with his dog. I found him chilled and on the ground with his dog nearby, but I couldn't get him up. It took the volunteer fire department and the EMTs to get him through the woods to the ambulance. Then, 2 days before Thanksgiving, he had an MRI that we thought was going to rule out any brain tumor. Wrong. Instead, I drove him to the neurosurgery unit at Albany Med. And right after Thanksgiving, they removed as much of the tumor as they could. He recovered from the surgery, had 6 weeks of daily radiation treatments, took oral chemo pills, but grew progressively weaker and less able to walk unassisted, and could only read a few sentences at a time. By May of 2011, Bob was ready to die. He said that he was glad that he'd had time to put his affairs in order, but he could no longer do any of the things that he liked to do, and he wanted out. To be clear, Bob wasn't suicidal. He wanted to live, but his cancer chose to end his life. All he was asking for was assistance in ending his suffering when he couldn't take it anymore. He asked me to get his pistol so he could shoot himself. As a responsible gun owner with a pistol permit, his guns were in a locked gun cabinet, up a flight of stairs that he could no longer climb. I couldn't do it. I loved him. I couldn't watch him do that. I told him that everyone would know that I had helped him, that I didn't want to go to jail for helping him. And he didn't want me to go to jail either. But I still feel guilty that I didn't help him escape his misery. By August, he was in a wheelchair. He entered home hospice in October. By the beginning of November, he only got out of bed when I used a lift to move him to the commode. Then it became impossible to do even that, and he was forced to wear diapers and be fed. We would lay in his bed and cry together. It was such an impossible situation. He died January 18th in 2012, and I vowed to myself that I didn't want anyone else that I loved to suffer like that. And I don't want to suffer that way either. I'm here today to tell you that this is an urgent issue, that New York should be the next state to authorize medical aid in dying. I know this is an election year, and lawmakers don't usually like to do anything risky in an election year, but this really isn't a risky issue. The vast majority of voters in every jurisdiction want to make sure that those who are dying in New York have this option. Few people will probably use it, but everybody deserves to have the choice to avoid needless suffering at the end of their lives. No one should have to die like Bob did. No one should have to go to prison for helping the person they love. No one should have to face telling the person that they love that there's nothing that they can do. I want to thank you all for holding today's hearing and for listening so attentively. Thank you very much.